And there I spoke to this group, which is the 中国企业家论坛, the annual gathering over the last 10 years of the leading private business people in China. These are business people, the faces of whom, some some in this audience will recognize, people like Ma Yun from Alibaba, Robin Li from Baidu, Wang Shi from Vanke, Chen Dongsheng from the Taikang Insurance Company. These are people who are some of the leading private business people in China. And they will be widely known around the world in a very short period of time, if those who are not already well known. But they were gathering for their 10th anniversary conference, and they asked me to come to talk about the history and present nature of Chinese business. And what I found most interesting was that the chairman of this group, the founder of it, Mr. Chen Dongsheng, in his keynote speech, he talked about the period from 2000 to 2010 as a golden age for Chinese private business. And he said, not me, that it was the second golden age of Chinese private business, the first one being the age of the Nanjing government from 1927 to 1937. And he reminded and urged his contemporary colleagues to look to the past for models of corporate social responsibility, of corporate leaders, and to look even further back than the Nanjing period. For example, to look back to Zhang Jian, the great first industrialist of China, the man who started the Chinese textile industry, a great scholar official and not a bad businessman, a man who became a model, I should say, let's get this here, a model of corporate social responsibility, a man whose hometown in Nantong is still erecting statues in his honor because he was a man who brought together workers, gave them education, gave them health care, housing, and so on, in a kind of an industrial model taken, in fact, from Massachusetts. And later on about a Harvard Business School case I did about the CP group, the Zhengda Jituan, which was a Chinese business people who fled to Thailand, set up their business in Thailand, but the moment the doors reopened in 1978, they came back and reinvested in China. It's a big agribusiness company, success. He tells you something a little bit different, and this is what he told me personally. He said, well, Mr. Kirby, as long as there is a human race, there will be Chinese in the 20th century, in which China was poised for global leadership 100 years ago, is education. 105 years ago, the old Qing examination system ended, and it would be replaced by in many ways, one of the most dynamic systems of higher education in the world, from about 1905, 1910, up until 1949. Great state-run institutions like Peking University, like National Central University, Shanghai Jiao Tong University, and of course at the top of research, the Zhongyang Yanzhou the Academia Sinica in Nanjing. Incredible private and Sino-foreign enterprises, of liberal arts colleges, Yenching University in Beijing, St. John's University in Shanghai, generation of Chinese leaders in both the arts and the sciences emerging out of those places. Peking Union Medical College, small but pound for pound one of the best medical colleges in the world in the 1930s. All of this would be basically seriously diminished and Sovietized in the 1950s and then destroyed in the 1960s. And yet, if you talk to the leaders of Chinese universities today, the memory of the excellence of the Republican period of higher education is in part a driving force for a push to excellence in the 21st century. Well, we'll come back to education in a moment. The point, again, of all of this is that we are all an act in progress. If China is strong today, it is in fact a cumulative effort over the course of a century. I like to say to Chinese audiences, if Harvard is any good as a university now, it's in part because it's 370 years in the making, founded in the Ming Dynasty, when nobody at Harvard knew that. But it is, we are all, as it were, changing and changing in very dramatic ways. So how does this help us understand 21st century China? I want to talk about three areas that I think are defining the question whether or not it will be the Chinese century. So something that matters for all parts of China's growth: infrastructure, second, entrepreneurship, and then third, and most important, education. So let's go back to our friend Sun Yat-sen. When I was in Taiwan recently, I was meeting a bunch of students at Zhengda, National Zhengda University in the business school. And I asked them, what do you know about Sun Yat-sen? And basically, they know nothing about Sun Yat-sen. No one knows San Min-Chui anymore in Taiwan. They know that he's on the money. But that's about it. And Sun Yat-sen, I think, matters enormously for the history of modern China, not because of the Three People's Principles so much. He matters enormously as the founder of the party state, Kuomintang, that made her communist. But he perhaps matters more than anything else as the great visionary for Chinese nation building, physical nation building, Jianguo, for the infrastructural process of physically transforming this enormous area inherited from the Empress Dowager, which we now call China. And the most important book that he wrote, that you can read surely here, published in 1921, is his 事业计划, translated into English as the International Development of China, building Chinese socialism through Western and Chinese capitalism, as he put it. A dream of 100,000 miles of roads, 100,000 miles of railroads. He is the first one to come up with the idea of building a dam on the upper Yangtze near Yichang. This starts in 1921. Subsequent governments, nationalists and communists, would try to do it until it would finally be done in the first decade of the 21st century. He was the man who had the idea of building automobiles in China, quote, so inexpensively that everyone can have one. And this seems to be happening, if you've been entrapped. He was the man who first used the word technocracy to describe Chinese government, or an ideal of Chinese government. And one phrase that has been attributed to him was the translation of that phrase, technocracy, as the dictatorship of the engineers. And I always tell my students at Harvard, if you want one phrase to define the Chinese government today, it is that it is a dictatorship of the engineers. And I say this, many of my best friends are engineers. I'm not against engineers. But if you want to define, 9 of the 9 most powerful people, the standing committee, they're all engineers. 2 of them also have training in the law, which may be a worrisome thought looking to the future, knowing that our country is run by lawyers. But that's a different matter. And few forces on earth, if we look at the 21st century, can match the combination of communist power and engineering ambition. And so this is what we see, and we've seen in a bunch of our cases on this. Because of course, engineering ambition is not new in China. Here's the national highway. If we look at the plans, the expressway plans, the kind of the interstate plans of the PRC today, the different lines as they've been developed, and as they are integrated, it's enormously more ambitious even than what the United States did in the 1950s. Where else on earth would you have the ambition to put into a plan, probably not, to have a highway to Taiwan? I'm not sure that this plan has been approved in Taiwan. But there it is. There it is. And we see, as you all know, a dam, the Three Gorges Dam here, not photographed, not before its completion, that could not be built in any country in the world today except in China. China is the only country in which this project could succeed. Highways. This is the highway in which I was traveling some time ago between Turfan and Urumqi. Magnificent highway across the Gobi Desert. A lot of traffic. In fact, at least a lot of cargo traffic. You can see the other lane going the other way there. Incredibly windy thing. And I thought, I'm going to see if my cell phone works out here. And so I took out my cell phone. And I called a friend in Hong Kong. No problem. Totally crystal. This is a cell phone that often does not work in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Whenever I go around a building or something, it often cuts out. It works. And so I did a case, a Harvard Business School case about China Mobile and their rural connection strategy. What are the business or political or other elements, and there are different ways of teaching these cases, about China Mobile's rural connection strategy? We focused this case in Yunnan, but it's a nationwide project for China Mobile. This is part of their effort. Actually, this is out in Kashgar to encourage people to watch the Olympics whether they wanted to or not. But here's a happy grandmother being connected in Zhejiang maybe to her grandson. Here's a happy farmer learning about the rise of grain prices. It's very interesting, this Village Connect project of China Mobile. It allows a village chief, if he or she so chooses, to, through his cell phone, to connect to the loudspeakers in the field. So it has an old-fashioned as well as a contemporary mechanism to it. And I thought to myself, well, is this going to work everywhere? Is this technology really universal? And so I went to the farthest away place I could possibly go, within the borders of the People's Republic of China. And so I went to Lhasa, and I said, well, maybe here, either for infrastructural or perhaps political reasons, this phone is not going to work. But no problem. No problem. And, you know, think of this. Think of the capacity of the state, this infrastructural state, this engineering state, and what it can do. And then think of the incapacity, quite frankly. And again, congratulations on your new terminal, of this country at this moment in time. The biggest infrastructure project in Boston now is a 4-mile extension of the Green Line, which, those of you who have been to Boston, is a 19th century trolley line. And it probably won't get built because there are too many lawsuits. So it's humiliating, often enough, if one believes that certain levels of infrastructure are actually important for economic development and for bringing, in China's case in particular, people out of poverty. The second dimension is entrepreneurship and what private enterprise can do, and how private enterprise is helping in the creation of this vaguely defined but clearly there new Chinese middle class. And to see and to investigate for myself, is there such a thing as a new Chinese middle class? Obviously there's one in Shanghai and Beijing, a kind of a middle/official class. But so I went to a series of secondary or tertiary cities, although when you're there they don't seem secondary or tertiary. So I went to Chongqing, which, thanks to the Three Gorges Dam project and the infrastructural developments associated with it, is basically become a Manhattan on the Yangtze. This is Chiang Kai-shek's old wartime capital, which, if you read Theodore White or others, is a bedraggled and overrun place in the 1940s. Becomes industrialized thanks to the war, but really is a backwater in every conceivable sense until comparatively recently. Now it is New York, and you know it's New York because that building says New York, New York. New York, New York. And so I went to the heart of Chongqing. I went to Liberation Square. Well, Chongqing is also famous for Chongqing Meizi, but I won't stop on that. Chongqing Liberation Square. This is a very interesting. This is a monument put up by Chiang Kai-shek in 1949, to celebrate China's liberation from Japan. Then in 1949, it becomes a communist monument to celebrate liberation from Chiang Kai-shek. Now, maybe today it is a monument of liberation from socialism. I don't know. But I do know this, that in Chiang Kai-shek's day and in Mao Zedong's day, there was not a Rolex clock at the top of the Jiefang Bay, as there now is. And this Jiefang Bay now overlooks Liberation Square. What's in Liberation Square? That's in Liberation Square, among other things. But actually much more interesting to me are the Chinese shops, the Chinese malls on the other side of Liberation Square. And so I went shopping with a good honestly middle-class person, a historian from Chongqing University. What's more middle class than a professor, after all? And we went shopping for Chinese brands, extraordinarily well-made, for my mind, extraordinarily expensive, not for export, not for international consumption, but for this large and growing domestic market. Places where that you see quite different styles than you'll see in Shanghai or in Beijing. You'll see shoes that I don't know much about women's shoes. I've never seen a pair of women's shoes that to me wasn't too expensive. But